model of the mind. We'll take a look today at popular models of the mind in psychoanalysis. We'll take a look at the Freudian models, Jungian model, the Yogic model, tantra model, information processing model, and finally heat model that I have created. And we will slowly take our journey from extremely simple models to more comprehensive and complicated models. We can start with Freud. Freud gave two models in his lifetime, the topographical model and the structural model. In fact, he gave three models, topographical, structural, and two forces model. The two forces model dealt with eros and thanatos, life instinct and death instinct. Most people don't even consider the third model as a model because it's more of a functional description rather than a structural model. So usually we talk about only two models given by Freud, topographical and structural. Jung gave his own model of the mind, which is quite different from Freud's model of the mind. In the Eastern tradition, there are many models of the mind. The most popular are two. One is the classical yoga model, and second is the tantra model. The classical yoga model goes into concepts of manas, ahankar, buddhi, and chitta, and we'll see what they are. And the tantra model goes into the concepts of chakra, nadis, and this is the model used by acupressure, acupuncture, reiki, pranic healing, tai chi, martial arts, nadi sciences, and siddha. Then we have Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, which is one of the most comprehensive models I've ever seen. And if you look at Sri Aurobindo's school as a full school, it has a philosophy of its own, a model of mind of its own working of the model of the mind, pathogenesis, healing technique, and most importantly, a self-development technique, not only for realizing potential in the secular sense of the term, but in the spiritual sense of the term, where the limits of human potential are much liberal than in the secular schools. Then we have the information processing model of the mind, more popular in the cognitive schools, and those which are more computational based schools. And then the heat model of the mind that I have written out. We'll take a look at each of these models. Let's look one by one at each of the models. First, we take a look at Freud's model. Freud's topographical model. In this model, Freud conceptualizes the mind as being constituted of three different areas: the conscious part of the mind, the pre-conscious part of the mind, and the unconscious part of the mind. You can see the unconscious is much larger than the conscious and pre-conscious put together. Conscious part of the mind is that part of the mind which is conscious. For example, at present we are discussing Freud's topographical model, that is conscious in us. If I ask you what shirt were you wearing 2 days back, you will recollect it on demand. That is the pre-conscious. That part of the mind which is latent but can be made active on demand, that is the pre-conscious part of the mind. An unconscious part of the mind which is difficult to recollect, traumatic memories of childhood, unacceptable desires according to our own morality, something guilty or shameful that we have done or thought of, all of that is there. And this unconscious material, as it tries to rise up, it is kept down by these forces of repression. The forces of repression, they keep the unconscious material unconscious. And this wall that separates the pre-conscious from the unconscious called the repression barrier, because it is this barrier the unconscious material is not able to cross as it wants to go up to the conscious. And we want to keep the unconscious conscious because unconscious because if this content was to come here or here, it would lead to creation of negative effect, unpleasant effect like pain, anger, fear, guilt, shame, envy, and we don't want to experience those elements. So this is Freud's first model of the mind, the topographical model. Freud also gave the second model of the mind called the structural model, where he introduced three agencies, id, ego, and superego, and put them in the topographical model. Id is the reservoir of desires and aggression, of instincts. Superego is the reservoir of ideals, thou shall and thou shall not. And ego is the practical agency that creates a compromise between the two extremes of id and the superego. Id is like the animal in man, and superego is like the saint in man, and a compromise between the two is the pragmatic individual. The ego is the coordinator at the service of reason and pragmatism, and in order to interact with the external environment here, the ego has to create a compromise between the id and the superego so that the cause of survival, pleasure, and growth are advanced. Superego is the agent of reality. This is Freud's second model. And you can see ego is partly conscious, partly unconscious, partly in the unconscious. Superego is partly in the conscious, partly in the unconscious. So in the unconscious, ego and superego are active. So there are many elements which are here which never come up because the ego or the superego keep them here. Third model of the mind, the next model we look at is the Jungs model of the mind. Jung's model of the mind is very different from Freud's model of the mind. Freud's model is more of a descriptive model. Jung's model is more of an ontological and teleological model. Jung brings in the concept of the self. Self is the center and the coordinator of the psyche. Self is also like the seed from which the whole tree emerges. So just as in the seed, there is the blueprint of the whole tree, in the self is the blueprint of the whole individual. Jung talks about the program of life, that there is a biological program of life, that we all have to be born, we have to be infants, children, teenagers, young adults, middle-aged person, old, and ultimately die. This is a biological program of life that nobody can escape. Aligned with this biological program of life are psychosocial experiences and roles we have to go through. So when we are in the infancy, we have to experience the childhood. We become a child, we are a child and we experience childhood. When we become teenagers, we experience the struggle of trying to separate oneself from the entanglement with the parents. And the mythological equivalent there is the prince trying to slay the multi-headed dragon monster to free himself. And once he does, he gets as a prize the princess. So that is a mythologically depicted struggle, which actually is an unconscious struggle inside the mind of a person in that age. So there is an archetypal set of experiences that we have to undergo in the teenage. And then comes the age of young age, where we all want to become a hero. The hero archetype activates. And then the entrepreneurship comes in, or the hunter-gatherer starts. So we have to become a hunter and gather for our family, for ourselves, the working life. The hunter archetype activates in the middle age, young adult age and the middle age. And then the teacher archetype and the healer archetype activate, and then finally the old wise man, and then it is death. So according to age appropriate elements are activated in us and facilitates us to undergo different experiences at different ages across our life cycle. And Jung says the self coordinates all of this. Self coordinates that age appropriate elements are activated and deactivated in the psyche. And these experiences just don't happen, they are embedded in the mind in the latent form. So Jung conceptualizes a collective unconscious around the self. The collective unconscious is populated by archetypes. What are the archetypes? The child, the mother, the father, the warrior, the healer, the teacher, the poet, the magician, the old wise man. These are the archetypal images. It's almost like a pre-cooked psychological packages which have to be activated in the heat of experience. So archetypes are here. Jung says we don't just come into this world, we come into this world knowing that there will be these roles in societies played by somebody, and we will also have to play these roles. So these are the primary archetypes which we see in society and are present in all of us and fascinate us. And then there can be secondary archetypes which are created by culture in its mythology, which may be culture specific, which may be individual specific, but there is a personal myth, there is a cultural myth, and there is an archetypal myth. The archetypal myth is common to the species. The archetypes are common to the species. So around the self is the collective unconscious. This is common to the species and yet is uniquely individual. Just as we all have fingerprints, but the fingerprints are unique. Around the collective unconscious is Freud's personal unconscious. And around it is the conscious, and in the conscious is the ego. Unlike in case of Freud, in Jung, ego is completely in the unconscious. In Freud, ego is partly in the conscious, partly in the unconscious. In Jung, sorry, I made a mistake. In Jung, ego is completely in the conscious. In Freud, partly in the conscious, partly in the unconscious. Superego is not found here. Instead, Jung talks of a moral complex, which is here. One of the archetypes is what Jung says is the moral complex. And that is there by birth. In case of Freud, superego is created at the end of the Oedipus complex. In Jung, the equivalent of superego, the moral complex, is inborn as an archetype. Very important to Jung is the ego self-axis. If the ego looks inside adequately, listens to the inside, to the self is activating and deactivating archetypes according to the program of life. So everyone has an essential program of life and a specific individualized program of life. Just as we all have a fingerprint, but a unique fingerprint. So there is an essential program of life, but the constituents of that essential program vary from individual to individual in proportion. If the ego listens to the self and the archetypes which are activated or deactivated, the ego self-axis is strengthened and the mental health is better. If the ego listens more to the environment and not to the inside, this becomes weak. And that is trouble from mental health point of view. One of the goals of Jungian therapy is to strengthen the ego self-axis. In other words, dive inside oneself, find one's authenticity, and live life according to that authentic individual plan of life. Jung's self is also different from Winnicott's self or Kohut's self. Jung's self is a structural self and an inborn self. Winnicott's self is a functional self and created in phenomena after birth. Kohut's self is structural in a way, but it is created in a phenomenon. Jung's self is inborn and structural. In some of his writings, Jung says the self is not here but around. So he has at times said it is in the center, at times he says around. In the center, I find it creates a better model of the mind. Third model of the mind is the classical yoga model of the mind. There are many models of the mind in yoga. This is a popular one. Here is the environment or the world, and the senses report material stimulations from the world. And these senses report to this apparatus, which is the manas. It reports to the manas. This should be slightly on the higher side. The senses report to the manas. Manas is the desiring mind. That part of the mind which is desiring. So desiring happens here. Second component is ahankar, which is different from ego. And manas is also different purely from id. Manas is not completely unconscious, it is partly conscious also. Second element is ahankar, which again is not equivalent to ego. Neither Freudian ego nor to the ego normally we say in the sense that somebody is too proud. Neither of that is equivalent to ahankar. Ahankar has many meanings here. The first meaning is Ahankar is that element which joins the soul to the body. Second meaning, Ahankar is that element because of which the intelligence, feeling and power of the soul is spread across all the cells and the cells get coordinated. So it's spread out as intelligence and control across the whole system, across all cells. Third meaning of Ahankar is it is that which provides me a distinction between I and not I. Fourth meaning of Ahankar is the drive for power, which is where it becomes equivalent to the way normally the word Ahankar is used. So this is Ahankar. And the fifth meaning of Ahankar is it is the I-ness, that I do certain things. And in fourth and fifth meaning, it comes close to Adler's concept of power and Kohut's concept of self. Then we have Chitta, which is the reservoir of impressions from the past, not only of this life's past, but of past of all the past incarnations. So this Chitta is like id, but it is not only of this birth, of many births. Buddhi is the thinking part of the mind, the reflecting part of the mind. And one special part of this Buddhi is called Vivek, where you can reflect upon Buddhi itself. And that Vivek is observer and the will together. And that is very important for healing or changing oneself. And then we have the Atma or the soul, which reincarnates, and in every incarnation from experiences it extracts the essence and develops itself. And when the evolution starts getting near completion, slowly the need for experiences goes down, and therefore the motivations and desires go down, desires and fears cease, and one enters into a state of no thought, and from there the spiritual experiences start off. So this is the classical yoga model of the mind. Then we come to the tantra model of the mind. Tantra has a specific worldview, and based upon this worldview, reality view, the tantra model of the mind is developed. The philosophy of Tantra is a full school, that is a philosophy, model of the mind, pathogenesis and healing technique, all the four. So Tantra is a full school. Yoga also is a full school. In psychoanalysis, we don't have any full school. We have discussed this in another episode of what is a full school, 3/4 school, half school and a quarter school. Tantra believes that the reality or the universe is constituted of different zones. A zone of matter, energy and force, the physical universe. A zone of life energy. A zone of emotions. A zone of thoughts. A zone of karma. A zone of bliss and a zone of pure consciousness. The soul, which comes into evolution, takes something from all these zones to create the human integer. And of course, it takes a very small amount compared to the immensity of each zone. Just as from the entire matter in the universe, I have taken only 75 kgs to create my body, which is a very small part of all the matter that exists in this universe. Similarly, my soul takes some amount of emotion, some amount of thought, some amount of life energy to create my system. And the karma is individual, building life after life. So, Tantra believes that there is a soul and there are 5 bodies interpenetrating each other that constitutes the human integer. There is a soul Then there is the karmic body. Then yin and yang, the masculinity and femininity. Then thought body, emotion body, life energy body, and the physical body, and they interpenetrate each other. Tantra says, in order to coordinate all the 5 bodies and facilitate transportation across bodies, we need a junction called the chakra. And these chakras are hundreds of chakras in our system, out of which 114 chakras are moderately significant chakras. And out of these 114, some people look at 114 as moderately important, some look at 112, some look at 108. But, and therefore, the number of beads in mantra recitation are 108, corresponding to a system of 108 chakras, moderately significant chakras. And out of this 114, 112 or 108, whichever system you follow, 7 are major chakras which are depicted here. The first is the root chakra at the base of the spine. Second is sex chakra, 2 inches below the navel. Third is the solar plexus, 2 inches above the navel. Fourth is the heart chakra in the center of the heart. This is the classical location of the heart chakra. In pranic healing, we use a heart chakra which is 2 inches above this, which is different. The classical place is exactly in the center of the chest. Throat chakra exactly at the throat. Agnya chakra between the 2 eyebrows. Crown chakra 2 inches above the head. So this is the way the man is constituted. Each chakra is responsible for certain motivations and psychological operations. Root chakra is responsible for elements related to survival. So aggression and fear are operated from here. So if anybody has a problem related to aggression and fear, root chakra has to be cleaned. This would be the prescription from Tantra model. How to do it? There are 100 different ways. Sex chakra is responsible for sexuality, sense pleasure, envy. So these two essentially are very Freudian and Kleinian chakras. Solar plexus is responsible for the element of power, all desires and frustrations related to power, domination, submission, calibrated self-assertion. Alfred Adler is here. Heart chakra is the center for love, belongingness, attachment. Bowlby, Eric Fromm are here. Throat chakra is responsible for expression, art and craft and creativity. Art therapy is here. Agnya chakra is responsible for thinking. All cognitive therapies are here. Crown chakra is responsible for mystical and spiritual aspect of our lives. So human potential movement, parapsychology, spiritual psychology, they are here. This is the Tantra model of the mind. The idea is wherever in whatever chakra there is a problem, you clean and energize the chakra. Then we have the information processing model of the mind, which is used by the cognitive schools or cognitive sciences. Here we look at the environment from which stimulation comes, and the stimuli is reported as sensation, becomes perception, goes into short-term memory, if necessary into long-term memory, taking something, working back in the short-term memory, then going into decision-making, execution. And there is attention which is continuously moving, and there is a feedback loop of learning from what happens in this execution. This model does not separate processing of cognitive information and processing of affective information. It does not go into primacy of childhood, does not go into what happens in dreams, why those things happen in dream, why the information processing in dream is different than information processing in the normal waking state? How does the unconscious mind function? How is it different from the conscious mind's functioning? Do we require a separate information processing model for the unconscious mind? All those aspects remain for some other discussion. Then we have Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, where Sri Aurobindo accepts the complete tantra model, adds to it the yogic model, and adds to it his own elements. These are the elements he has himself discovered, defined, elaborated. Different types of different components of the mind, and here different parts of the being. Very central to Sri Aurobindo's thinking is planes and parts of the being. So he says there is this spirit, and below the spirit is a supramental mind, below that is over mind, below that is intuitive mind, below that is illumined mind, below that is higher mind, below that is mind, the thinking mind. And then it goes into various parts of the mind. One part of the mind which is doing pure thought, another part which is doing thinking for related to emotions, third thing which is doing thinking related to the physical body and cellular thinking. And then it talks about psychic being which is evolving and the central being which is not evolving. And he has his own concepts of the subconscious, the inconscient, and the subliminal. This itself would take 2 hours. Some other day we will discuss Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind. I have created the heat model of the mind, which takes Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, puts Jung's collective unconscious, Freud's personal unconscious, my own idea of the personality ego, all of it together, along with some innovations and a completely different way of looking at mind in elemental terms. So this is the psyche that comes up in the heat model. There is reality. Reality puts up one principle for one universe. There may be many universes, but there is one principle, and the principle creates one oceanic anchor, and then from that comes existence, and in the existence we find the psyche. And there is the world on one side that the personality ego is in touch with. So I look at ego in 2 different ways. A system ego, which is operating automatically in the unconscious, and a personality ego, which is more near to Kohut's self, and Sri Aurobindo's idea of the front ego in the front. So the heat model of the mind brings together Sri Aurobindo's model, which includes the yogic model and the tantra model, Freudian model, Jungian model, insights from other schools of psychoanalysis, and some of the unique innovative things in terms of concepts, approaches, ideas, agencies, structures that I have added to create the heat model of the mind. As we go along, we will see how it operates in function in the normal sense, in pathological sense, therefore giving us pathogenesis, and therefore giving us an elemental approach to both pathogenesis and healing. And it develops our idea of the model of the mind. A perfect model of the mind doesn't fall from heaven. It has to develop over years. This is one ground model I have created. Over the next few years, I am sure it will develop much wider and deeper and advance the cause of our knowledge, healing, and self-development. If you look at it in a plan view, this is how the heat model looks. The psychic, the karmic layer, the yin and yang, the area of collective unconscious, the area of collective unconscious, the area of personal unconscious, the area of the conscious, and the environment outside. Thank you.